placeholder going. Let's see what he says here. Restarting router. Doesn't sound good. The internet there is just horrible compared to here.
Right.
He did a live show last week, though, and it held steady the whole time. So that was nice.
Okay. All right. That's always a good thing. Good sign.
I've got to pick up your book.
Yeah, man. I've definitely got copies left.
Yeah, it's available online, right? I can just order from a...
Yeah, you can from my online store. I don't have it on Amazon, so it's just
I'll go right to
from my.
yours. Okay. I'll do that.
Mhm.
All right, let's see. All right. I think we are ready. After some technical difficulties, welcome everyone to Season 2, Episode 4 of Speakin My Piece. Each week, Dekel Bor sits down and talks with some of the greatest jazz musicians on the planet. Dekel Bor has worked with jazz legends Johnny Griffin, Billy Hart, Reggie Workman, and Roy Hargrove, to name a few. And his album, Let Love Rule, is out. Bear with me a second, folks. I'm just checking some things here. All right, we seem to be okay. Testing this out. Dekel's album, Let Love Rule, is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com. And today, for our latest installment of this wonderful series, and bear with me one more moment, folks, little technical difficulties. All right. Today we're joined by trumpeter, producer, and educator Jeremy Pelt. Pelt formed a bond with the Mingus Big Band early on, and he's performed with Bobby Blue Bland, Ravi Coltrane, Lonnie Plaxico, and many, many more. His new album, GRIOT, This Is Important, is out now on High Note Records, as is his book, available on his website, titled GRIOT, Examining the Lives of Jazz's Great Storytellers. So we're going to try to deal with these technical issues, and bear with me one second, and we'll be right back. All right, folks, we are back. Finally, I think we've got our technical problems sorted out, but I'm going to pass the mic over to Mr. Dekel Bor in Berlin. Dekel, welcome.
Louis, I'm happy to be here. The internet connection in Germany can leave a lot to be desired. So my apologies. I'm super happy to be here. Jeremy and I has been kind of going around this for so long. We were looking to have Jeremy guest on the Let Love Rule tour, and then the world kind of changed. So in order to kind of get inspired by him, learn from him, hang with him, play with him, we figured this would be the next best thing. So without further ado, there's going to be so many personal stories here today, but Jeremy, how you been, man? I'm so happy to see you.
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to be here and get this happening finally. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So congratulations. There's a new book. There's a new album. I'd love to hear all about it. I mean, which one would you like to start with?
Whichever
Album,
one you
book. So I think for us that grew up in the before internet days, where we used to hang until the early parts of the morning just to kind of get any wisdom from our elders, any wisdom from our heroes. There was always the holy grail of the Art Taylor book. I mean, I kind of got it for the interview with Coltrane, and then it kind of opened the whole world up to you. I'm completely amazed that this book is not common knowledge in any household, but I think what you're doing is just so meaningful to us artists. I mean, anyone of us who has been interviewed knows that there's never that thing with the other side. I never really get it. There's some things that only brother in arms will get. And I think your book is it's like I cannot see this not being sorely needed. So I'd love to hear, first of all, what was the moment where you thought, all right, this could be something that I want to be, delving into?
Sure. Well, it existed. You mentioned Art Taylor's Notes and Tones, and that was, something that was like a light bulb moment for me. Albeit I was 17 years old, right? But I found it and I read it, and it was something that I always kept coming back to,
Yeah, absolutely.
and because it meant different things at different points of your life. And
What did it mean to you? I mean, what now that you're kind of looking back, what words come to mind?
well, I mean, so at 17 years old, when you read, Miles Davis's interview or something like that, or you read Elvin Jones' interview, and you start to think about some of these questions as being mundane or just like at 17 years old, mind you, not now, but at 17 years old,
Right.
I'm like, why is Elvin Jones saying that all you had to do is have a good press roll? Like, what's so important about that? These.
Right.
I didn't have a palate for realizing at that point. So
But I think there's one thing that I lament is being young. But when I think about, like, now that I read the Western interview or Richard Davis, that when they talk, it's completely political. It's completely about. I mean, it seems so relevant now.
Oh, it's definitely, and then you get a sense of how relevant it was then. But it's just that in your youth, you don't really have that same kind of thought, especially if the culture and the society around you is dormant in that regard at that point. So, like I said, but that said, I always thought that there should be something that was relevant to my generation, back then. And so I always thought, well, man, somebody should do these interviews. Somebody should. And then after a while, um, years later, right? Because now we're talking about, we're going from 94,
Right.
93 to 2018, where I decided that I should be that somebody. And the moment that,
Man, I cannot think of a better guy. I mean, there's of our generation. You got a minute on me, but I cannot think of a person, of an artist that is across the board respected as much as you are. I mean, there's just with your there's a certain kind of earthly intelligence and so much wisdom, and just the music that you have under your fingers, the people that you're associated with. I mean, there's almost no one, I think, that is that well respected of our thing. So for
oh, I
you
mean,
to do this,
yeah.
I mean, it means a lot.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like a convergence of two opportunities. There was one where, so the defining moment for me was, I was at home again. This is summer of 2018, and I'm on YouTube watching like all these clips, and I see this interview with Art Taylor and Warren Smith, and it was a beautifully done interview that lasted for an hour and a half. And it was right up here at the Schomburg Center in Harlem, and I was like, man, this is so great. And plus, I knew Warren Smith. So as soon as I finished watching that whole thing, I was like, you know what? I should go ahead and do this. And so Warren is actually one of the first people that I called. And then Paul West and other cats. And then that's when it kind of went from there. And I think one of the things that enabled me to be able to continue has really something to do with the the amount of time that I've spent around them, and the amount of time that I spent on the scene, So yeah, that does have something.
And looking back on it, what did you feel that you've learned from speaking to all those people about, I mean, these are the deeper things that we kind of deal with.
I've learned that the Black experience in the States is not monolithic at all. And what is so interesting is to get different perspectives from many different corners, and also many different generations have
Yeah.
a different take on things. And so that's been the most rewarding thing. And again, no, or not again, because I didn't say it in the first place, but I've amassed at this point almost 80 interviews, and each one of them, there's a difference in opinion, not even opinion so much as a difference in ideologies, that
Hmm.
from one generation to the next. And so that's a good thing to learn.
Yeah, that's very, very special. Any ones that you had a moment that you felt like, oh my God, this is very, very special, and I can't wait to share this moment with people, or peer, or someone that is a hero of mine, that I feel like, oh my God, this is like, just this moment was worth the entire evening. I mean, just this very special, intimate thing was the ticket, was the ticket for the whole thing.
Well, funny thing is, there was many moments like that. I think, interestingly enough, also I'll say that um, there were certain situations where in every single interview there was always this profound statement that was made that just kind of hit me. Wow,
Mm.
you know, and so that was worth the reward immediately of doing
Absolutely.
the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, there were certain people that I interviewed that I knew very, very well, and so they never came across as predictable, which is a beautiful thing, especially when you know somebody so well, but they're
Yeah.
still not predictable. But there were is one thing when you know somebody for even for a long time, but there are certain questions or certain topics that you guys just never talk about, right? So
Absolutely.
you just never know. And then once you actually have that conversation, then it's like, oh wow, you know. So I mean, those situations definitely happened.
So I want to ask you different things about your own music, but I kind of want to ask you all those things through mutual heroes.
Hmm.
So the first one, uh, but it's really kind of like the self from which everything kind of grew from. So what is it like to be a trumpet player in the world of Louis Armstrong and everything that kind of came from that?
Huh. What is it like to be a trumpet player in the world? Um, trumpet in general, and I'll probably get in trouble
I
from.
tell you where I'm going with this.
Well, I'd say that trumpet in general is a very demanding instrument, but it's also something that is so singular in presence, more so than a lot of different instruments. And in that presence, it's almost implied that the trumpet should be the lead voice. And even so you have that pressure, and then when you have people like a Louis Armstrong that enforce that, and with the kind of musicality that he had, very precocious at an early age, and enduring through his whole life, then you feel a significant amount of pressure to uphold
Absolutely.
if you choose to follow down that path. And so that's what it's kind of like.
I remember a gig where with Cecil Bridgewater, speaking of trumpet player,
Mhm.
and he would always say that this music is like a church. This is a holy experience. There's absolutely zero tolerance for anything but that on the bandstand.
Mhm.
And I think all of us kind of feel that way about this music. I mean that there's very little tolerance for bullshit around it.
Mhm.
And if we're already speaking about Louis Armstrong, um, how should I put this in the least political way? I'm getting a feeling of the younger cats that there are some things that are in fashion right now in jazz that let people think that they don't have to go back and understand the roots of the language, the roots of the culture, and I mean really, really things, basic things. I mean, and this album kind of does all that for me. Just take a medium, slow tempo blues and make it sound like the whole universe is expanding.
Mhm.
And this is it's something of a lost art nowadays.
I could see that. I could see that. I mean, well, so the interesting thing about that statement is that, truth be told, that kind of sentiment started way before our generation. That's the interesting thing. I mean, I think that not even our generation, but subsequent generations after ours, because now we're not the youngest people anymore, right? So
Don't
generations
go
after
there.
ours, they catch the brunt of it, but that was something that was started, I would say, even before our generation. And the music being where it's, where different people's minds are headed. um yeah, I would say that while it's not something that is prevalent, or something that has started with the newer generation, it's something that is a bit upheld
Yeah,
by
yeah,
the generation. So I mean, it's And yeah, I mean, there should be emphasis. I've always thought that there should be emphasis placed on the human aspect of the music, and also, um, really the blues, but not for the sake of playing the blues. You know what I mean? It's because, I mean, there's different ways of things being interpreted. You know, there really is. I mean, when you think, I was just thinking about this the other day too. It's funny, but if you, there's a difference between, Nat Adderley, who's just unapologetically just like everything's a blue note, and it's very greasy and whatnot, which is
Yeah,
killing. I love
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Versus
yeah.
versus somebody that versus a Miles Davis, you know what I mean? Who doesn't that's not his necessarily his thing, even though he can get there. You know what I mean? He doesn't come right off the bat. So there's many different interpretations and conduits to getting to an emotion.
I
And
will say this about both of them. I'm assuming that if I'm playing to a woman in Belgium, I'm playing Louis Armstrong, Hot 7, Hot 5, any Miles ever, and Nat Adderley, any Nat Adderley, all of that is going to represent the greatest embodiment of some of the greatest things about American culture that ever been. And I think that speaks volumes. And it's also the difference in personalities, I think, also speaks volumes. Just the people that we mentioned.
Yeah.
All right, I'm jumping to the next one. So,
okay.
I chose this because you have a very, very special thing with pianists, and also for Freddie Hubbard, which I think is a big thing in your life.
Yeah.
But you have a way of playing with piano that is very, very special.
Well, thank you. It's it's one of those things where I've learned to allow space in the playing for dialogue. The more and more I get into it, the more and more I like doing those kind of duos anyhow.
Right.
I put out a record like, Art
So,
of Intimacy, say, it's because of the feeling and the feel that I like to have in a quiet room playing just with just that sound.
well, there's also the great, being in the presence of greatness with George Cables.
There's that also. Yeah.
I gotta ask you. I went to a streaming service. God help me, and I clicked Jeremy Pelt, and that album comes up. I mean, at the top of your whatever most played song tracks or whatever. And why do you think that is? That people respond to the thing you did with Cables so much?
I don't. It's a great question, and I think that more than anything, I think it's timing.
What
To a
does that
certain
mean?
degree.
What does that mean, timing?
Well, in terms of when in the trajectory of what I'm putting out, it drops. You know what I mean? Like, let's say if I'm doing, if all I do, right, and at this point I've got almost 20 CDs as a leader.
Whew.
If all I've done for 19 or 18 CDs leading up to that has been standards records, then I don't know that it would resonate in the same type of sense. No matter, it could still be the same quality, but the resonation might be a little bit different. What I mean by timing is that it kind of dropped in this kind of time, this vacuum of, I'm just coming off of my quintet CD where I'm doing the Rodin suite. So there's this, and then before that, I can't tell. There might have been a live record in Paris and all this. And then now it's like, okay, now everybody shh, because now it goes down from all of this to now we just have you focused on Jeremy Pelt, George Cables, and Peter Washington, and the sound is just marvelous. Um,
Yeah.
it's unpretentious in the sense that um, I didn't really focus too much on having any kind of arrangements that took away from
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
possible to do. And so I think that might have had some kind of play to it, because really my focus was just on playing these melodies and being able to play with the cats that I was playing with.
Man, that's that I'm gonna think about. Anything you want to share on Freddie Hubbard in your life?
Oh, Hub, man, Hub was amazing. He was one of the best friendships I could have ever asked for, and the most encouraging things that I'd never thought that I would have was my friendship with Freddie. Um, and his acknowledgement of my presence and of as an up and coming trumpet player was, I mean, I've been on stage with him, and he would say something like, "Yeah, Jeremy Pelt sound like Freddie Hubb," you know,
I
and whatnot.
I should also let people know, whoever's watching, that I actually never met Freddie, but from what I hear, he wasn't the way it was with you wasn't the way it was with most people. I mean, he
Well,
wasn't. You know what I
he
mean?
he could be,
That's very special.
it's special, but to counter that, I would just say that he wasn't necessarily uh he wasn't he was subject to whatever emotion he might have been feeling that day.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because I don't want to make myself seem like I'm special and that I got any kind of special treatment. A good friend of mine, a cat named Clark Gayton, he's a trombone
Yeah, I
player.
know Clark.
Clark. We had a conversation on Facebook like years ago, because it was at the time when Lady Gaga was doing these records with Tony Bennett.
Right,
And
right, right.
everybody was like, "What the hell?" And Tony came out and said something like, "Yeah, she works just as hard as Ella Fitzgerald," and everybody was like, "Get out of here!" Like, is he crazy? And one of the things that Clark said that stuck in my mind was that when an artist gets to those years, that age, it's almost like a handing. They know that they have to kind of endorse somebody, and hand down something to somebody. So that was the catalyst for that. But then I think about Wallace, Ronnie, and Miles, and
You being you,
you know,
man. I don't want to bust your balls, but you,
hmm?
the modesty is appreciated. But
Well, I'm just saying that there's a certain time where, I mean, cats, when your name starts getting circulated around, then they pay attention. And Freddie was a fan of mine as well. He would call me, and that would be like the happiest part of the day. I could feel like shit for the whole day, and then all of a sudden I look at my phone and it'll be like, and automatic. It didn't matter. I remember I was having dinner or something with my fiance at the time, and Freddie would call, and I'd be like, "Excuse me."
I have the exact same moment. My fiance almost broke up with me years ago because I had to take that kind of call in the middle of something, and
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's but so Freddie was, it was everything to me, and just to be able to call him and talk, and that was one of the things that I would do a lot, was I would call him up and just let him just go wild, because and now, only now, he's been dead for what, 10 years or something like that. Now it's like I think about things that I wish I would have asked him when he was here. But my
Absolutely.
whole thing was, I was always like, I'm just gonna shut up and let him talk, so
I often feel that with many of the people that I was fortunate to play with, sometimes I don't reminisce the time on stage as much as I look back to the getting to the gig on the train, sitting waiting for a plane. Like there will be such moments of wisdom from those people. I mean, it's really unbelievable. Like the time spent with them as people, sometimes and almost often for me transcends the gig, because there's something about the music that is evaporates in the air in the greatest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's of the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
And many times, like I totally hear you on this. So I'm moving forward, if you don't mind.
Right.
Uh, I don't know if we have time for this, but um, I'll take this as an example of someone that kept a band playing original material that was completely against the tide at the time. And I mean, I don't know if I ever told you this, but for me, your quintet was, I mean, I don't even know what to say. I can imagine that keeping a band like that for as long as you guys did, album after album, allowed you guys to grow in the deepest way. And the albums show for it. I mean, and I can also imagine that you would be getting a lot more whatever if you kept a different band on each project. God forbid that using that word. I
Yeah,
mean, it's not in vogue these days to keep a band.
that's
It's not
true.
in, and for me, you guys were almost like, and it's not cool to have a great quintet anymore. Everybody wants to have a synthesizer that they speak out of that checks their email, or God knows what.
Yeah.
But you guys did something that is very, 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 very deep in this world.
Well, thank you. You know, I that was the band that effectively taught me how to be a better band leader. Um, so we
How
grew
so?
well because you learn that was the first band that I had on an international level,
Right.
and so it was so in order to keep that going, and that was also the band that I kind of learned how to start booking my own tours and doing all these different things, and under some very harsh
You booked
elements.
that band yourself?
Mostly, yeah,
Unbelievable, man.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
But dealing with lots of different things. Dwayne Burno, God bless him. Rest his soul. I mean, he was dealing with liver issues, and so we had to figure out how to get the all his medicine to him and do that. And a lot of times I would be driving from country to country, in Europe. So I mean, it was a tight band that in that sense, and we definitely did change things up musically and really stretched outside of ourselves quite a lot. And I learned, funny thing is, I was the one that was doing most of the writing for the band, right? But
Absolutely.
their interpretations made me have to shed harder on my own material, which was great. So the
Yeah.
challenge was always there, and it was something that it's a band that I always I hold high to the highest possible esteem in terms of my output as a leader. Um, and it's something that I also lament wasn't necessarily appreciated at the time.
You feel
Um,
that way?
I do. I feel like,
I can tell you that I remember the day that I got Men of Honor on CD. And I put it on, and then it took me on this journey for at least a few months of just like listening only to that.
oh man.
Um, and that was after like a string of albums. I always felt that when people take they take one band and and really commit to it, that it really leads to greatness.
Hmm.
And I think you guys kind of embody that for me and my guys. I mean,
Well, thank you. I mean, and when I say didn't get appreciated, I certainly don't mean by the fans. I'm talking about in by really the media and the press, who swarm to kind of embrace different things. And so I think we got lost in the fold that
why do you
sense.
think that is?
Uh we don't have that much
I
time. But
can
I'll
tell
tell
you
you,
why.
huh?
Well, if you had a couple of bullshit ass vocalists, one on each track, and three different bass players and a
Well,
remix,
I
and
mean,
all
there's
the
that,
things that
but
are wrong with whatever.
I think that a lot of times it's the press is going to embrace who they're going to want to embrace,
Yeah.
and I could have said, all right, well, let me get the vocalist on, but I don't even think that would have made that much of a difference, because once you're pigeonholed into a certain type of thing, then that's what it's going to be. And it also arrived, like what you said earlier, which is it's true, is that it's not really in vogue to have a band anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
And it
yeah,
has been that way for a long time. So when you think about festivals all over the world, and their whole thing about wanting to have these kind of prized bands, of which are all a leaderless band, where everybody's going to be you're going to have a band
yeah, yeah.
of superstars. That's
Well,
what
when we
was
think about it right now, I mean, all the guys in that band are yeah, very important artists. I mean, that's the only way to put it.
happening.
But I also, I think people don't always know this, but I remember going to school. I went to school with Locrasto, and between Locrasto and Nivergeld, I would tell him, Len, anytime that Mike Moreno cannot make the Pelt gig at Smalls, remember that Jeremy Pelt experience? I mean,
Yeah,
I was
man.
this close to doing something to Moreno, so you cannot make the gig. True story. Once a week I will tell them, man, drop my name if he cannot make it. But you guys have played the most raucous sets there. I
Oh
mean,
man.
for people that were outside of New York, I mean, they don't always know that it wasn't always this acoustic quintet thing.
Mhm.
That there's a very, very, very rich thing here.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Frank taught me a lot. Frank
Yeah,
taught me a lot.
absolutely.
Well, because Frank, he would come in, and he'd have all these analog, keyboard, and that was at the point where I was starting to want to learn about this stuff. So I think Frank definitely taught me a lot. Vicente was like the person that said, okay, look, instead of getting all these pedals and just get a bass effects processor. So the
Yeah, right.
first thing I got was like this GT6 bass boss, processor. This is just board. And that's what I used when I did Identity, was that. And I would take that on the road too. And then Frank, it was funny because if you talk to Frank, he'll tell you, like, every gig when we would be in Europe, and I'd get like my own little delay, I'd be like, hey Frank, because the sound guy would come up to me and be like, all right, so are you going in from the board and then into the mic and then this? And I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Frank,
Exactly.
Frank, tell him what I'm doing. So he would be the one to really set that up. And then when I pared that band down, and it was just quartet with me, Frank, Gavin, and Dana,
Yeah.
we'd hang out at the end of the gig, let's say, and be back in my room drinking, and they would just give me all types of different music. They're like, oh man, check this out. That's how I found out about Lewis and Genevieve. Now they're called Nowhere now. But these different bands and whatnot. And I'm like, wow, and that was a big learning experience for me. So as much as they learned from me just about traveling and being on the road, I definitely learned a lot from them, just in terms of what was current and what they were checking out right now.
Yeah, yeah. These are all very, very special cats. So I'm
Mhm.
moving to the next one.
Mhm.
Uh, this is Live at Blues Alley
Mhm.
for a few reasons. But I wonder what it was like for you to be a trumpet player growing in the time that you did, in the world where Wynton Marsalis just changed. I mean, in the world where Wynton Marsalis exists, just the
Mhm.
output, the trumpet mastery, the fact that he's so incredibly opinionated in the most beautiful way. He's also in your book,
Mhm.
uh, but I mean, I think with Wynton, it's very easy to forget that there's a master composer and a master trumpet player.
you know, Wynton, I'll tell you right now that during his, we'll call it reign, you know, especially in the in the 80s on through the 90s, truth be told, I didn't check out Wynton. I checked my person to the extent, here was my introduction to Wynton, because
Who
before I was,
was?
well, I'm telling you, before I was into jazz, I was way into classical music,
I
and
didn't
so
know.
I was a nerd, and so I hang out with other friends of mine that were like trumpet nerds, and when Wynton released that, I think his first classical record, they were all on it, like, "Hey man, Jeremy, did you check this out?" And I I flipped when I heard it. You know, he's playing Haydn, he's playing, you know, all these concertos, and I was like, and that was really what I was into. So followed him on as much as one can. I mean, this was before internet, right? So I mean, but you know, any kind of clippings, anytime he was on TV with the Boston Pops or whoever, I would be watching that, because I would, as far as I knew, because also at the same time, I didn't know anything about jazz, because all I was doing was doing classical. So as
Right.
far as I knew, he was a shit, you know.
I
Classical,
didn't
I was
know
like,
that.
wow. Um, by the time I got into jazz, which was right around the time that Miles Davis died, um, I had found out, you know, however long later, that Wynton was also a jazz artist. And if I'm being completely honest, you know, I did go and buy one of his CDs or one of his tapes, and I remember there was a mall in Los Angeles called, it's still there, it's called the West Side Pavilion, and it's got 5 levels to it. And I bought, and it was a choice between, you know, because this was going to be like me buying my first jazz CD or jazz tape.
Right.
So not my first, because my first was Miles Davis, but my first of the new cats, right?
And
And
also,
so
and there was also, I think, cast now don't know. Like I would get money from my dad. I could get one CD. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it's like you have to choose. It's
Right,
this one,
right,
that one.
exactly. So I'm sitting there and I'm holding uh Roy Hargrove or Wynton. And so I put Roy's tape down and I got the Wynton. And I always, like you said, I walked around with my tape recorder, my tape thing, you know, and my headphones. And I remember putting it on, and it was, I think the CD, the tape was maybe The Majesty of the Blues, or one of
Yeah.
those records that there was a lot of talking on. And you know, it took a while to get into it. So I put it on at the top of the mall, 3 floors up. By the time I got to the bottom, I went right back up to the store and returned it, because it was boring as hell to me. I was like, this is, no, you know. And then I got the vibe. I got Roy Hargrove, and I was like, oh,
Right, right. With Mark
this
Carry
is
on, right?
yeah, yeah. And that's what it was. So I didn't, I wasn't one of the ones that was swept up in Wynton mania, you know, at that point, because for me, first of all, I had always been so beholden to like the John Coltrane's and the Miles Davises and Lee Morgans, that it took me a while to just really find a young cat that I can get into. And to that effect, it started to be, it was Roy Hargrove and Terrence
Yeah.
Blanchard for me.
Yeah.
Terrence and Roy. Those are the cats that I was like, in the 90s, those were my cats.
The Roy thing, I definitely hear you.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, yeah, I think it's hard for people to understand, for us being young and have someone like Roy doing his thing. I mean,
Mhm.
that meant so much. I remember going to see him live when I was 15, 14 and stuff, 16 and stuff like that. And he seems like and he always seems so young. He seems like it was my age, you know what I mean? And playing the most incredible music you have. It was really unbelievable to
Yeah.
have someone that's close. I mean, it makes it seem possible in a way.
It does. You know, he immediately infectious. Um, he was just one of the premier people for me. It was kind of like what in the States they would call a matinee idol, you know.
Yeah.
And so he represented something that was very important to me at that time, in terms of hearing quote unquote new jazz, you know.
Yeah, I remember learning many of his tunes. The big ones for me were Tenors of Our Time and Family.
Hmm.
I learn the tunes. I would learn the tunes and the solos, and then I got Hutch to get me like I asked him, "Can I get an audition?" He looks at me as if I'm out of my mind. Well, there's no audition. Uh, and they let me sit in a couple times, at least 3, 4 times. And then he'd say, "Well, I'm doing a thing. Would you come?" Of course, I've come. And all the times that I got to play with him, I never ever felt as if this is. I always felt like I'm in the presence of greatness. And as people, as much as most people consider him a brother, I always felt that this guy to me is. It's as if I'm playing with Lee Morgan. I don't know. It's as if I'm playing with Louis. This is not something in my realm at all.
Right. No, Roy was, I remember because we used to hang out every time he'd come up to Boston, and we'd hang out there. I met Roy first in 93, 92 or 93. And then I'd see him when I was in college, and we'd talk on the phone every once in a while when I first moved to New York. He invited me to join his big band, so I went there. So he looked out for me. He was a real nice cat, man.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think also it's not always obvious to people, but he had the most insane musical instincts that I've ever seen someone have on stage.
Oh, forget about it.
Insane, not
Yeah,
something that you can ever learn or teach.
yeah. No, that much is very true. That much is very true. I learned a lot from him.
So last one, I didn't know which one to choose. I chose this just
Mhm.
because I didn't want to pull the Sidewinder or got whatever. Um, I think it's very, very, very difficult to make music feel the way this guy knows how to make a band feel. I mean, it really comes across on almost any record.
Mhm.
And I remember when I heard you for the first time, you set in with I think with Jalil and Lage or something.
Mhm.
And I got that feeling that this is like something is happening. And
Mhm.
every time I heard you, you have a way of making a band, of lifting the band somewhere. And I
Mm.
think audiences really get that, really respond to that in your playing.
Oh well, thank you. Yeah.
And
Oh, great.
teach me, teach that to me now, if you don't mind. I mean, what does it mean to have that lift?
Uh, well, I mean, I think that it's uh, it's something that is you can't necessarily be aware of. I mean, I don't know. I thank you for saying it. I don't think that I lead with the idea that I'm going to be uplifting. I think that it's a band type of decision. You know what I mean? Not decision, but reaction. Um, and also a decision to say, all right, let's leave this audience in a better state than they came in before. And everybody takes turns doing so. I think that there is a point that I recognize, my what I'm good at and how I'm good at connecting with an audience, and that comes from years of doing it, from a musical standpoint. And so I hold true to that. And that's another reason why you'll have a record like The Art of Intimacy and whatnot, is
So,
because
so I almost didn't want to open this kind of worms because this is good. We could take all night with this, but you're one of the last guys to really apprentice with many, many, many of the legends. I mean, I'm 40 doing my first album just because I wanted to take the time to play with anyone that I could play with. I mean,
Mhm.
any apprenticeship that I could get. And I'm still, listen, I'd give anything tomorrow to go on the road. I don't want money. I'll pay money
Mm.
to go with some of the people that I want to play with, because there's something that you get from that. There's no way of learning this. There's no other way. And I want to hear those stories. I want to hear about Peterson. I want to hear about Hayes. I want to be. I
Well,
mean,
I could summarize a bit about all of them. I think with somebody like Lewis Hayes as a soloist, one of the things that I was so fortunate to learn from Lewis was how here's the most interesting thing is that how we hear things. I'm looking at your hi-fi set behind you and whatnot, and we all have different ways of how sound is processed and it enters our bodies, right? And that also coincides with your musical taste at that point in your life. So now, as a 16-year-old listening to some jazz, you have different perceptions, especially if you haven't seen these people and experienced it live, right?
yeah,
So, for instance, when you hear A Love Supreme and you're 16 years old, your perception of Elvin Jones is that he's larger than life and he's loud as hell and he's bashing everything, and it feels raw, and it feels natural, and it feels great. So much so that you love that so much so that when you hear Billy Higgins on like Cornbread or Sidewinder, and
yeah,
he's light, it doesn't compute. Like it didn't to me. Like I was like,
yeah. From somewhere,
I was,
yeah.
I was like, he's all right, but yeah, Elvin, you know.
I,
So,
I will say this. I got to play the Workman band did a thing at Lincoln Center for Coltrane, and we were the opening thing, and there was another thing, and then it closed with was Elvin,
mm,
Delfeo, Peyton,
mm,
and I got to sit in on one blues
mm,
and sound check, and I'm thinking I could die right now. I don't need any more. I don't need anything more in life than to get to play two choruses with
mm,
the greatest person I ever lived.
yeah,
Man, these were the most difficult choruses of my life. The beat was larger than a truck. He
yeah,
wasn't playing very loud. He wasn't playing very. It. The intensity was something that was so deep and unmanufactured
mm,
that I felt like every note I'm playing is this. I mean, this big. I mean,
mm,
that was the lesson of a lifetime for me. That these people, the strength game. It wasn't playing loud. It wasn't playing fast. You know what I
right.
mean?
And so that's how it was like with Lewis Hayes. So when I first played with him, it was against what I had heard, what I've been hearing for decades at that point, but now experiencing it live and understanding what I needed to bring to the table, because his is one of the strongest beats I've ever played with, if not the. And I played with a lot of drummers. His is the strongest beat, and I was like, oh, so that's what made me understand the drums and the cymbal beat in a very special way.
Yeah, and I asked A. Burton to introduce me to him once,
Mhm.
and I thought this guy was the coolest thing that I've ever seen. I mean, it was a phenomenon just to see him walk and talk,
Oh
and
yeah,
it really made me understand why it felt the way it did, because you
oh
see
yeah.
this person, the way that he exists is so unbelievable.
And Ralph Peterson, these cats, their concepts of how they want you to play with them are very important. I mean, Ralph was, he told me, he was like, man, you got to play through the middle of my shit, man. He was like, and it made a lot of sense. And then when you listen back to it, it's like, oh, okay. So sometimes you don't necessarily experience it when you were actively playing, but then listening back to it, it's like, I see. You're controlling the whole composition. And Lewis Nash, I mean, there's nothing but sophistication in everything that he does. You know what I mean? And it makes it, and it's like he says in my book, his thought process of when he thinks about swing is allowing. And that's a key word, is allowing. And it does allow you to definitely just fly, or somebody like him, when I play with Roy Haynes, it's more like dancing, because he's dancing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's definitely lots
Man,
to be.
so I'm ashamed to say that because we just moved this past 10 days ago. I think I told you this. So I ordered the book. I haven't arrived yet. I was supposed to hold it here and tell people that they kind of have to get it.
Yeah.
The little that I saw online about that book. Oh, thank you. They're right there. The little that I got to see online. I mean, this thing is a precious thing. I think people will get so much from it. I encourage all you guys to get it. What's next for you musically? I mean, it's been a crazy year. I'm sure you had some time to think about what's the next thing.
Around this time is when I start kind of putting ideas together, because we're going to go into the studio in September with my quintet this time, and I've got some ideas that I'm working on right now. This is like the time where it starts to happen.
Great, man! I can't wait to get it. Man, what can I tell you? Thanks for coming on the show.
Man, thank you for having me, man.
I'm hoping when this is done, if this is, things go back to playing gigs, that you'll be back guesting on that Let Love Rule tour thing as we talked about.
Look, I'm open and available. The good thing is that I'm starting to kind of get calls for Europe.
Man, let me know when that is happening.
Yeah, I will, because that's really, I've missed you guys so much. I'm ready to come over there. So yeah.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Man, it's great to have you. It's been fascinating. Stay safe.
Thank you.
And I'll see you in a minute.
And anybody that wants to get the book, they can go to my website, Jeremy Pelt.
Repeat that.
I said anybody that wants to get my book or t-shirts now, or the CD, can go to my website, which is jeremypelt.net.
There you go. All right. Man, It's been a pleasure. Stay safe.
Thanks a lot. All right.
Bye-bye.